Hello, my name is Joe, and I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. 여기서는 you don't say hi Joe. 제가 다니는 미팅에서는 대부분 그런 제가 이렇게 말을 하면 they say hi Joe 그러거든요. um, it's good to be in a room with a bunch of other Korean brothers and sisters. I live in Maryland, and in the meetings that I go to, they don't have almost any Koreans. And I'm not racist, but I think today I realize I definitely have more of a heart for Korean brothers and sisters who also deal with this disease. So I'm not used to reading. When I usually share my story, I just kind of talk, but I have it all written. So I'm just going to read this, I guess. So my sobriety date is January 28th of 2014. And I'm here by the grace of God, good sponsorship, and a bit of willingness to take action. My home group is Catonsville Young People Group in Maryland. We meet on Fridays at 7:30, and I am the treasurer of this group. I have a sponsor. I work the 12 steps, and I have the honor and privilege of taking other men through the steps. Recently, I began to go through the 12 steps again with a new sponsor, and I was taught that I must continue to deepen my spirituality in order to live a happy, joyous, and free, and most importantly, a sober life. And I know this to be true from my own experience. And I am here to share that experience with you today. I will talk about what I was like, what happened, and talk a little bit about what I am like today. I was born into a great family, a family very much like yours, who went through the challenging experience of immigrating to a new country. And although our circumstances were definitely difficult and tumultuous at times, I can definitely say that I've been blessed with loving parents and a fortunate upbringing. I have an older sister and a younger brother, and our parents always prioritized our well-being and raised us as best as they could with strong Christian values. I do remember having some issues as a youngster and causing some issues. As an example, once I ran away from my kindergarten and got lost in the streets of Seoul. Luckily, a kind-hearted passerby found me and contacted my parents through my name tag, which had my contact information. I used to get in fights in elementary school, and my mom was forced into being a teacher's assistant during my first year in elementary school. But as I got older, my behavior improved, and I became a good kid, generally speaking. We did some moving between Korea and America. I remember counting the times I moved between the ages of 6 and 12 and being amazed that we moved over a dozen times. But we were all okay for the most part. I remember around age 12 was the first time I remember having difficulties with my emotions. I began to feel very uneasy, anxious, nervous, and self-conscious. We had moved from Korea to Maryland for the final time, and I remember how uncomfortable I would feel at school. I spent a lot of time thinking about what other people thought about me, thinking about whether other people were talking about me or making fun of me. The way other people viewed me was very important to me, more important than how I thought about myself. It defined me. And it was very stressful to feel this way all the time. As I got older, I would also have difficulty being happy. I would always think about how my situation could be better, how if my parents had more money, I could have more clothes and be cool. How if my father was not so strict, I could hang out with all of my friends and be one of the cool guys. I was very frustrated with my environment, and I felt like everything in my situation stopped me from being really able to enjoy myself, enjoy myself. And I continued to build, and this continued to build and build inside of me. From the outside, I might have looked okay, a student who got good grades, a youth group leader at church, very well behaved. But on the inside, I was bitter, resentful, frustrated, angry, and unhappy. Much later, when I was getting sober, I learned that the way I felt when I was young is called a spiritual malady. There was something wrong with my spirit, and it made it difficult for me to live and enjoy life. And this spiritual malady about me is very important because it is one of the things that makes me an alcoholic and an addict. Once I reached a certain point of feeling frustrated and unhappy, I was willing to now do what would make me happy. And the obvious choice to me seemed like doing drugs and alcohol. I was about 17 or 18 years old, and my friends had already been smoking weed and drinking, hanging out with girls and having a good time. So why shouldn't I? So I had my first experience with a drug. It was marijuana. I met up with two of my best friends in a neighborhood parking lot, and I took my first hit of a joint. And I remember taking in the smoke, and with a deep breath, and when I breathed out, I felt like it was the first time I really took a full breath. I no longer had those thoughts worrying about what other people thought about me. I was no longer anxious, nervous, or self-conscious. I could be myself and speak my mind. That's what smoking marijuana did for me. It made me feel free. And I felt good. And alcohol did the same thing for me. It made me feel more confident and free from all those thoughts in my head. Then soon I learned the second thing about me that makes me an alcoholic. I found out that when I consumed drugs or alcohol, I did not have control over how much I did or when I would stop. For an example, from that first day I smoked weed, I pretty much stayed high for the next 2 years. I refer to these years as my Snoop Dogg days because I was pretty much high like all the time. Oftentimes when I would drink to the point of blacking out and not know how I got home. Eventually, I ended up getting a DWI, got my license suspended. I got into like 3 car accidents where I wrecked my parents' cars, and even dropped out of college because I was smoking weed and doing other drugs rather than going to class. So you can see that I did not have control over my use of drugs and alcohol, and I willingly faced very serious consequences because I wanted to keep doing drugs and drinking. After facing some of these consequences, I began to see how drinking and drugging was negatively impacting my life. It was pretty obvious to see that. And when the consequences got bad enough, I was not able to do what I wanted to do, like graduating college, getting a job, providing for myself, and living a fun and good life like other people were doing. So I decided that I would really try to stop drinking and drugging. And for years and years, I continued to stop drinking and drugging, and again, I failed. Oftentimes, I would go for a few weeks or even a few months without a drink or drugs, but inevitably, I would find myself drunk or high again. Why was this the case? I learned much later that this is because I have the 3 characteristics that make me an alcoholic. First, I have that spiritual malady, which makes me want to do drugs or take a drink in the first place. And then when I do drugs, I find that this solves my spiritual malady, but then I have the problem of not being able to control how much I do. So when I try to stop completely, I found that I couldn't stay stopped, and that at some point there would be a strong enough temptation and I would relapse, knowing what my consequences were. And this happened over and over again for many years. And all this time, my life was on hold. My family's lives were miserable, and I continued to destroy other relationships and wreak havoc in my life. After trying many different ways to control my own addiction, I finally gave up. And I admitted that I needed help and that I cannot do this on my own. Then my father heard about the 길갈 ministry and the House of Thanksgiving through the Korean newspaper. I got in touch with Dr. Hong. I don't know if you remember, but when we spoke on the phone, Dr. Hong explained the 12-step program to me. And to be honest, I thought you were full of crap. I didn't believe what you told me. I did not have much hope for recovery, but I decided to come here to California because I wanted to take myself out of my family's life. For years, their lives were consumed by worrying about me and taking care of me, and I felt like it would be better for them if I just went away. So I came all the way out here to Los Angeles and began living at the House of Thanksgiving. Being at the House of Thanksgiving did two main things for me. First, it allowed me to be separated from alcohol and drugs. And secondly, it introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step programs. And it is through the 12 steps, which I went through with the sponsor, that I was able to have a spiritual awakening and recover from the disease of alcoholism. And I say recover because I no longer suffer from addiction. I don't have the obsession to use drugs. And I haven't had a strong obsession to use in a very long time. But it did not happen right away. I came to HOT in the summer of 2011, but I didn't get sober until January of 2014. One of my favorite sayings in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, is AA is not for people who want it. It's not for people who need it. It's for people who do it. And I have found this to be true. I was a heroin addict, and I really wanted and needed recovery. But I did not get recovery because I did not do the program. At HOT, I began to go to 12-step meetings just about every night. And at these meetings, I would read the 12 steps, and I could see how the steps could be very helpful. And at the meetings, I would see other addicts and alcoholics who were once suffering from addiction just like me, but they had recovered and stayed sober for 5, 10, 20 plus years. And not only that, I could see that their lives had completely changed and that they had built a new life and became contributing members of society. And that was definitely much better than the life that I was living. And I became hopeful, and I believed that the 12-step program had worked for these people, and that seed had been planted, and I learned what I needed to do. After staying at HOT for about 8 or 9 months, I moved out to a halfway home, which is typically what addicts and alcoholics do after being in a full inpatient program. A halfway home is a place where recovering addicts live. They begin to work or go to school and transition back into life, but continue to live at a house that requires you to be sober and attend meetings in order to live there. I got a part-time job and was attending meetings on my own. And being back in LA reminded me of how I used to take the bus everywhere to go to meetings. I didn't have a car, so I would go everywhere, Hollywood, West Hollywood, Santa Monica. And driving around with my friend this week reminded me of how I used to do that. Then I got my own place in Koreatown and continued to attend meetings. I had a sponsor at that time. A sponsor is someone who is a recovered alcoholic or addict. A sponsor has been through the 12 steps with another sponsor of their own, and they continue to be active in a 12-step program helping other alcoholics and addicts. And I was doing fairly good. I was pretty happy traveling all around LA to attend meetings. But something began to happen when I was about 1 year sober. I started to become unsatisfied with my life. I was building a new life, and I started to become impatient with the progress. And looking back, I realized that my frustration was mostly due to the lack of materialistic things in my life. I did not have a car. I did not have a good job or career. I did not have much money. I was renting just a small room in Koreatown. I did not have a pretty girlfriend, and the list goes on. Back then, I could not see that recovery is an inside job. It is a process of working on my heart and my brain, not simply attaining materialistic things in my life. Sure, materialistic things are good. Nothing is wrong with those things. And many recovered addicts and alcoholics do very well for themselves. I've come to learn, and I'm still learning today, that material progress only follows spiritual progress. So one day, when a longtime friend called me and offered me a full-time job, I dropped everything I had here in LA and went back to the East Coast. This was a very big decision, but I did not think to discuss it with my sponsor or friends. I did not think about what would be the best thing for me to do for my recovery. I simply wanted to fix the problem of not having enough things in my life, things that I wanted. And I thought those things would make me feel better. So within a week, I moved to Richmond, Virginia. For the next year, I got the things I wanted. I had a decent job, got a nice apartment, bought a nice car, and I got a pretty girlfriend. But I stopped working on my recovery. And the next year in my life was one of the most miserable times I've ever had. And here is why. I had this job, but I was always worried about it. I thought I wasn't good enough for the job, and at the same time, I thought the job wasn't good enough for me. And I began to be consumed by fear of what I would do if I lost this job. How would I continue to have the things I want? And I had this nice car, but because I am immature and irresponsible, I bought a car that was way out of my budget. Now I was always worrying about like maintenance and how I don't have enough money because I have to pay for this car. I know it sounds stupid. I had a nice apartment with a friend, but I was a terrible roommate. I didn't know how to be a good roommate. So we were always arguing, not able to enjoy ourselves at this nice place. I had this smart, pretty girlfriend, but we had one of the most toxic relationships I had ever been in my life. And I say all this to demonstrate that because I hadn't treated what was wrong with me on the inside through the process of recovery, my life was still a mess. No job, car, girl could fix that. What's interesting is that during this time, I was still going to meetings regularly. But just going to meetings was not enough for me. And although I wasn't in full-blown addiction like I once was, I was having trouble staying sober for more than a few months at a time. And more importantly, I was seriously struggling with the temptation to use and drink. I was always obsessing over how I can drink or how I can find drugs. What a miserable life. And one day, somebody came up to me after an AA meeting. I had just picked up another newcomer chip because I relapsed. His name was Tom. Tom said to me, "Hey Joe, you know, you might be an alcoholic who needs to do the full program of AA." And something clicked for me then. I had never done the full program of recovery. Maybe I should try doing everything that is suggested to me. When I got this willingness, it was January 28th of 2014. And it was suggested to me to get a sponsor and go through the entire 12 steps with a sponsor. And a sponsor simply has to be someone who has what you want. It was also suggested that I get a home group, which is a meeting I attend regularly and participate in by helping to set up or clean up or whatever help we can give at that meeting. It was also suggested that I go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and I did all these things, and I continue to do them today. I learned not to listen to my own thoughts and not to do whatever I feel like doing. I became willing to listen to others. And by staying sober and going through the steps, I was able to form a relationship with God, who I try to listen to today. And today, I can stand here and tell you that I am the same person, and I am also a completely different person. I like to read a passage from the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. They call these the promises of recovery. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. When I was writing these promises, I could see how each one of these promises had come true for me in my life. And life in the past 4 years has been sometimes good and sometimes bad. I went back to school and graduated. I've had jobs, I've had promotions, and then I got fired from that job. I was jobless for almost a year. But I can stand here and testify that these promises have come true for me, and that they will continue to materialize if I continue to work for them. I am so grateful for the House of Thanksgiving and Dr. Hong, who introduced me to recovery. And I'm grateful for the 12 steps and other alcoholics and addicts who helped me through this time. And I'm really, truly grateful that so many of you guys are still here. If we just stay sober, there's a whole new life out there. And I've only just begun to live it. And I seriously can't express how glad I was to see you guys here today. And with that, I'll keep coming back. Thanks for letting me share.